3,500 years ago, in the sun-baked streets of ancient Egypt, physicians already knew something was terribly wrong when a patient's urine attracted ants. They had no idea why. They had no idea it would take another 3,300 years, and one of the deadliest diseases in human history, before anyone actually understood what they were looking at. This is the story of diabetes, one of humanity's oldest known diseases, and the thousands of years ancient civilizations spent trying to explain, diagnose, and survive a condition they could see clearly, but could never truly understand. Long before microscopes, blood tests, or the word insulin existed, ancient doctors across the world were independently noticing the exact same strange pattern in certain patients: relentless thirst, constant urination, unexplained weight loss, and urine that was somehow unmistakably sweet. The earliest written record comes from Egypt, around 1550 BCE, an enormous medical scroll known as the Ebers Papyrus, over 20 meters long, containing hundreds of remedies, described a condition marked by excessive urination. Egyptian physicians didn't have a name for it yet, but they clearly recognized it as a distinct illness, one they tried to treat with a mixture of wheat grains, fresh grits, and herbs like coriander and fenugreek, hoping to ease the symptoms even without understanding the cause. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ancient world, physicians in India had developed a diagnostic method that sounds almost too strange to be real, and yet it worked. Ancient Indian doctors would leave a patient's urine outside and watch to see whether ants and flies were drawn to it. If insects swarmed the sample, it meant the urine was unusually sweet, a sign of what they called madhumeha, literally translating to honey urine. It was a simple, low-tech test, but it was remarkably effective because it relied on a real physical fact ancient doctors could observe. Unmanaged diabetes causes sugar to spill into the urine, and insects can taste what the human eye cannot see. Indian physicians Sushruta and Charaka went even further, writing detailed descriptions of the condition and noting patterns that still hold up today. They observed that it seemed to run in families, and that it appeared more often in people who were overweight, inactive, and ate rich, sweet, indulgent foods, and early, intuitive grasp of the difference between what we'd now separate into type 1 and type 2 diabetes, centuries before anyone had the science to actually prove that distinction. Chinese medical texts describe their own version of the same disease, calling it Xiaoku, the wasting thirst disease, a name that captures its cruelty in just 3 words. Patients drank constantly, urinated constantly, and wasted away regardless. Chinese healers prescribed herbal treatments and dietary changes, doing what they could to manage symptoms they had no real way to stop. 3 completely separate civilizations, thousands of kilometers apart, with no contact or shared knowledge, and all 3 had independently identified the same disease, using nothing but careful, patient observation. For centuries, this disease existed without a proper name, just a collection of symptoms, described slightly differently in every language. That started to change around 230 BCE, when a physician named Apollonius of Memphis is believed to have been among the first to use the word diabetes, borrowed from the Greek word meaning to siphon or to pass through. It was a fitting name. Patients seemed to pass fluids straight through their bodies, no matter how much they drank. In the 2nd century CE, the Greek physician Aretaeus of Cappadocia wrote one of the most detailed clinical descriptions of diabetes to survive from antiquity. He described patients essentially melting away, flesh and limbs dissolving into urine, an image so vivid and so accurate to the devastating effects of untreated type 1 diabetes that his writing is still quoted by medical historians today. Aretaeus reportedly called it one of the most wretched conditions a person could suffer, precisely because there was nothing, at the time, that could stop it. Roman medicine picked up where the Greeks left off. The physician and encyclopedist Aulus Cornelius Celsus documented the condition in his sprawling medical text, De Medicina, one of the most complete surviving records of Roman medical knowledge across the Roman world. As in Egypt, India, and China before it, diabetes remained something doctors could describe in painstaking detail, but never explain, and never truly treat. It wouldn't be until over 1,000 years later, in 1675, that a British physician named Thomas Willis rediscovered what ancient Indian doctors had already known for centuries, that the urine and the blood of these patients was sweet. Willis added the word mellitus, meaning honeyed, giving the disease the full name we still use today, diabetes mellitus. And it took until 1776 for another British doctor, Matthew Dobson, to scientifically confirm the actual cause of that sweetness, excess sugar, circulating in the blood and spilling into the urine. Understanding what diabetes was didn't mean ancient, or even early modern, doctors could stop it. And for thousands of years, that gap between diagnosis and treatment came at a devastating human cost. What we now call type 1 diabetes, where the body simply stops producing insulin altogether, was, before the 20th century, an almost certain death sentence, usually for children and young adults. There was no substitute for the insulin the body could no longer make. Ancient and early modern physicians tried everything available to them. Severe dietary restriction, forced starvation-level diets, opium in some cases to ease suffering, and every herbal remedy their culture had ever recorded, fenugreek, bitter melon, coriander, and dozens of other plants believed to help control symptoms. Some of these treatments did have modest effects on blood sugar. None of them could replace what the body had lost. Type 2 diabetes, more closely tied to diet, weight, and lifestyle, was survivable for far longer, which is likely exactly why ancient Indian physicians like Sushruta and Charaka were able to describe it with such striking accuracy, linking it to rich food, inactivity, and body weight. Patients with this form of the disease could sometimes manage symptoms for years through the same dietary control ancient doctors had been prescribing since Egypt's Ebers Papyrus thousands of years earlier. But for the more severe form of the disease, ancient medicine had reached the absolute edge of what observation and herbal treatment could accomplish. Physicians could describe diabetes with haunting precision. Aretaeus could compare it to the body dissolving into liquid and pouring away. What no one could do, not the Egyptians, not the Greeks, not the Romans, not physicians for the next 1,700 years after Aretaeus, was actually stop it from happening. This is really the story of diabetes across almost all of recorded human history. Brilliant, careful, cross-cultural observation, running headfirst into the limits of ancient science. Doctors on 3 separate continents had all correctly identified the same disease using nothing but urine, ants, and careful pattern recognition. And yet the actual mechanism, insulin itself, remained completely invisible to human eyes for another 3,300 years. It's worth sitting with just how long this gap really was. Egyptian physicians were writing about diabetes symptoms in 1550 BCE. Aretaeus was describing the disease in devastating detail in the 2nd century CE. Thomas Willis confirmed the sweetness of the urine in 1675. Matthew Dobson proved it was blood sugar in 1776. And still, there was no actual treatment that could keep a type 1 diabetic patient alive for more than a short, painful stretch of time. That finally changed in 1921 and 1922, when Frederick Banting, Charles Best, and their colleagues in Canada successfully isolated insulin and used it to treat a diabetic patient for the first time in recorded human history. Almost overnight, a diagnosis that had meant almost certain death for thousands of years became something people could actually survive and eventually manage for a full lifetime, which means for well over 3,000 years, from the scribes writing on papyrus in Egypt to physicians testing urine with ants in ancient India, to Roman doctors compiling case after case in De Medicina, humanity watched, recorded, and tried to treat a disease it could see with total clarity, but could not actually cure. It's one of the longest unbroken threads of medical observation. In all of recorded history, the same disease, described almost identically by cultures that never spoke to each other, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, all waiting on the same missing piece. The Egyptians left us papyrus. The Indians left us the ant test and the word madhumeha. The Greeks left us the name diabetes itself. And all of them, without knowing it, were leaving behind pieces of the same puzzle, one that wouldn't be completed until a laboratory in Toronto, thousands of years after, the very first physician noticed something strange about a patient's urine. If a disease this devastating could be watched, documented, and fought against for over 3 millennia before anyone found the answer, what does that tell us about how much of ancient medicine was closer to the truth than we usually give it credit for?